In this video, we're going to look at an introduction to using objects, methods, and properties in JavaScript. So, there is something called the window object that is built in that we can use in JavaScript. And that window object has some methods built into it. One of them is called alert, and one of them is called prompt. So let's first talk about how to use an object and its methods. So the syntax for calling the method of an object is to use the object's name followed by a dot, so we call this dotted notation, and then the name of the method that belongs to that object. And when we use a method, we have parentheses where we supply any parameters that might be needed. So this is the generic version of calling the method of an object. We name the object and we put a dot, then we call its method, and we supply any parameters that that method needs. So here's an example. We talked about the window object. It has two methods called alert and prompt. It has more than that, but those are the two we're going to look at right now. So here's a statement that calls the alert method of the window object. So I can say window, that's the name of the object that exists inside of our browser at all times. Window, I can call, that's the name of the object. I call its .alert method. And then inside the parentheses, the parameter I have to supply is what's going to be printed out in this alert. And in this case, we're supplying a string that says this is a test of the alert method. So what does this do? When we call window.alert and give it this string, it does this. Well, it actually doesn't. It prints out a box very similar to this that just says this is a test of the alert method, and it has an OK button. Apparently, they decided not to include that in the slide. But now let's look at prompt, because it's very similar, except if you look at prompt, it requires that we give it a string and then another value that says default. Let's take a look. So user entry equals. Now what's different about this from the statement back here? On this one, we didn't have an equal sign in a variable on the left side of it, because this just generates some information to the user and doesn't give us any information back. The prompt actually gives us some information back. So when we call window.prompt, and notice the word window is not here. We'll talk about that in a second. But when we say prompt, this is a test of the prompt method, we get a box that looks like this. And the box says this is a test of the prompt method, which is what we put right here. And then we gave it a default value for the user, and it puts 100 in the box. So if the user just comes over here and clicks OK, it's going to return the value of 100. The statement on the right side of the assignment operator gets evaluated. It comes back with 100, and it gets assigned to the variable user entry. Okay, if I type in 50 in here and I click OK, the result of this prompt statement will be 50, and that's what will get stored in user entry. So the default value is what we put in there just to save the user some clicks and some types. If most of the time they're putting in 100, we can set that default value for them. Now, the window object that we've been talking about in these last two, that we have an alert and a prompt, when we call the window object, we name the object and call its method. But the window object is special because it's considered the global object in JavaScript. So we can leave the first part, we can leave the object name off, and it will be just fine. So I can call alert without saying window.alert. I can call prompt without saying window.prompt because it's inferred. property of the window object. We can read its properties. So all objects have methods and properties. We can look at some of the properties of the window object. We've used two of its methods. Now we can look at its location. The way we do that is to name the object and then dot and then call the name of the property. So the object name is window, the property name is location, so we can say alert window.location. And this would return to us and pop up in an alert box and tell us the location of the window. And the window's location is the URL of the page. Where are we at on the internet, basically, is what it's going to show us. The window object also has a couple other things that will come in handy. It has a method called parseInt and another method called parseFloat. So anytime we do a prompt like this and it returns something, in this case it returns whatever value we type in here, that value gets returned as a string. It is not a number. Even if it contains the digits 100, it still gets returned to us as a string. And if we want to make it a number, we have to convert it. We have to make it a number before we can use it in any calculations. So we have two methods for that. One will parse whatever a string is as an integer, which means it's going to remove any decimal places that it has on it. And then we also have parseFloat, which will change whatever's in the string to a float, which means it can have decimal points. So if we have multiple things in the string, only the first number in the string is returned. If there was some leading or trailing spaces, they're removed. If the first character cannot be converted to a number, that means parseInt won't work, parseFloat won't work because it didn't start out with a number. We get the value NaN. That's what gets returned to us, and we're going to look at that more in the next chapter. But NaN is short for not a number. Hey, I tried to convert this string to these, but whatever what the string had in it was not a number. Well, let's look at some examples. So here we're using prompt. We're saying enter any value, and we're giving a default value of 12345.6789. So if we do that prompt and assign it to entry A, and then alert entry A, it's going to display that string. Remember, it's automatically a string when it comes back from the prompt. So it's going to just display 12345.6789. If I typed the word dog in there instead of those numbers, it would display dog. No problems at all because it's a string. Now I'm going to take entry A. Let's assume they typed 12345.6789. They took the default value. And I run parseInt on it. Take entry A, I run parseInt, and I give it the value of entry A, which was that string, 12345.6789. ParseInt will convert that to an integer. And basically, it, just so you know, it does not round. It simply chops off everything after the decimal point. The technical name for that is truncates. So it truncates the .6789 off of 12345, and entry A will now be the number 12345, and it is a number now, not a string, because we parsed it into an integer. All right, let's do the same thing with entry B. We're going to prompt the exact same thing. And if somebody just hits OK, it's going to come back. It's going to alert with the string 12345.6789. And now we're going to parse it as a float, entry B, store it back in entry B, and then display it. And because we parsed it as a float, we get the exact number, 12345.6789. This time it was displayed as a string. This time it was displayed as a number. Looks exactly the same. The difference is we can use entry B in a calculation now. Up here, entry B was a string before we parsed it as a float, and we can't use that in a calculation. All right, so here's another example. We're going to prompt enter any value, but this time we're going to give it a default of hello. So assuming the user just pushes OK, entry C will end up being the string hello. Now if we take entry C and we try to parse it as an int, that first character is not a number. It doesn't know what to do. So as we parse it as an int, entry C will now contain the value NaN, or not a number. And it will display, when we alert it, it will display not. Now here are some examples. Up here, we took the value from the prompt, and then we took the value and we parsed it as a float, and we did it in multiple lines. But there's a way to do that shorter. So here we have entry A, and we have parse int, and inside parse ints, parentheses, we actually have the prompt statement. So prompt enter any value is inside of the parse int. So it's going to prompt the user for the value, and then as soon as the user clicks OK, it's immediately going to parse it as an int and then store it in entry A. So we've took what we did in 2 lines in the previous video, or in the previous slide, and we did it in 1 line. So prompt, take whatever comes back and parse it as an int immediately, rather than doing it in 2 steps. Same thing here, prompt, parse it as a float, and then store it as entry B and print it out. And here's the same thing with hello. We prompt it, parse it as an int, and it's not a number, so it displays not. All right, here's another method of the document object. We haven't worked with the document object. I think we've been doing window object so far. So a method of the document object is the method write. And write, we can provide in its parameter list inside the parentheses, we can give it a string and it will write that to the page. So let's take a look at some code here. We have some HTML. First time we've actually looked really with some HTML with some actual JavaScript inside of it. So here's our body of our HTML. And here's the main section of our HTML. And here's the footer of our HTML. Inside the main section, we have a heading level 1 that says hello. Then inside that we have a paragraph that starts with today's date is, and then another paragraph that says we hope we enjoy our website. But inside this first paragraph we have a script tag, which means there's going to be JavaScript between these 2 tags. So constant today equals new date. So what does this do, new date? This creates something called a date object. Basically, it gets today's date, whatever date is set on the computer, it stores it in this variable called today. Then we call this method of the document object and we say document.write, and then we use this today variable that we had here, and we use a method on it called toDateString, which converts this date to a nicely formatted string and writes it to our document. So it's going to insert this date into the paragraph that it is inside. So it's going to say today's date is, and then it's going to put whatever, this JavaScript is going to put whatever date it is on the computer that the person reading it is working on. So if it's July 4th, when I open this website, it's going to say today's date is July 4th. And if I open it tomorrow, it'll say today's date is July 5th. We get some interaction going on. So it'll say today's date is July 5th. We hope you enjoy our website. And then down here in the footer, we're using some JavaScript also to write our copyright. Copyright, the symbol for copyright, if you remember that, \U00A9. And then it's using a function, literal, I should say, and it's using the method getFullYear on this date that we established up here for today. There, it has a method called getFullYear. So it's going to copyright, print the copyright symbol, and then put the current year. So 2 dynamically generated pieces of code. One is going to use the date string, and the other one's just going to get the year out of the date. And then it'll look like this. Hello, today's date is, and that date string gives us Tuesday, May 18th, 2021. We hope you enjoy our website, and there's the copyright with the C and the current year 2021. If you do that, then you never have to update your website with a new copyright. And that's perfectly legal. If you're the author of a website, if you're the author of any work, it's automatically copyrighted. There's nothing special that has to. So you can have your copyright update on your website. All right. The last thing we're going to talk about in this video, before we go on to our concrete examples in the next video, is the number object. So all these numbers that we've been storing are technically number objects, and they have a method called toFixed associated with them. So if I declare a constant called pi, and I assign it the value 3.14159, I can use the number object. So this is a number, and it's a number object, so I can call its method called toFixed and pass it a 3, which says I want basically to convert this to 3 decimal points. So it's going to take pi, which we put with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 decimal points, and it's going to change it to 3.142. And notice toFixed does round. Where when we had parse int, I told you it just truncated and does not round. toFixed will round. So it 3.141.5, it looks at the 5, and it automatically says that that 1 needs to be a 2 when it goes to 3 decimal points. So if I wanted to get this down to the nearest whole number, I could put a 0 in here, and it would round to the nearest whole number, as opposed to truncating in the other method that we. All right, this has been a lot of information. All these videos have been a lot of information. In the next couple videos, we're going to go through some examples and use all of this information that you've been overloaded with for the past 5 or 6, 7 videos. And we're going to actually use the things that we looked at in some programs and see how they work. In this video, we talked about objects and their methods and properties, and we looked at calling their methods and looking at their properties using dotted notation. So we learned how to call the method. We learned how to call the method and put something inside the parentheses to give it some information for its parameters. We talked about the window object, and that the window is considered the global object, so that we can leave the word window off when we're calling one of the Windows methods. We don't really have to use the word window. We can just use alert or prompt without saying window.alert or window.prompt. So we learned about the dot operator. We learned about the document object, and that it had a method called write. And we learned about the number object that had a method that let us change things to a fixed number of decimal points instead of a floating point. In the next video, we'll go ahead and go with our examples for this chapter that you can look at and learn from before you actually do your assignment.